So, to begin, as a large emerging middle income economy, India seeks high economic growth driven by industrial and infrastructure development. Land is an important element towards achieving this high growth, but it is often treated purely as an asset, a factor of production, while ignoring multiple values that a large section of society attaches to it. When these values are not acknowledged and addressed, it leads to conflict. These conflicts are not insignificant. They lead to a number of issues, including rising instances of social unrest around land. Uh, Courts are being overburdened by land and property disputes in them. And also, there's a huge quantum of investments that have been locked up due to delays in land acquisition or diversion for the project. Now, policymakers' key response to this has been either to simplify or fast track the procedures involved in taking over these resources. But how effective are these measures? Because we are seeing that time and costs of large development projects have continued to rise over the years, and disputes over land acquisition is one of the leading reasons for stalled projects. This fact is an admission by the government's own report released by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This has also been cited in our report. Um, Unfortunately, the mainstream narrative that exists around these issues do not paint a complete picture of these conflicts or the people involved in them. They're often talked about as mere obstacles or bottlenecks to these development projects. To understand them completely, we undertook an analysis of land conflict cases. Through quantitative and qualitative data, our report presents a comprehensive analysis of stalled investments and communities' demands in 607 ongoing land conflicts and 82 conflicts that have ended on the ground. This is to understand better what aggravates or helps resolve conflicts. Before we get into the findings of the report, I will briefly run you through the methodology that we follow for gathering data and analyzing these cases. Firstly, what is a land conflict? So, we have defined land conflict as any instance in which the use of, access to, ownership of, or control over land and its associated resources are contested by two or more parties, and where at least one of the contesting parties is a community, a group of families. So, how is the data gathered and analyzed? Land Conflict Watch has researchers across the country. Many of them are here with us. They identify and collect data on conflicts from their respective states. They collect data on various geographic, social, legal, and economic parameters for each conflict case. So, the data that's gathered by our field researchers is then submitted to our team of reviewers. Like I mentioned, we have a multidisciplinary team of researchers, lawyers, and writers who review and verify these conflicts before publishing them on the website. We share this data in an aggregated form, so in an Excel sheet of sorts, with other researchers, journalists, activists, etc., who use it for further analysis or further interpretation. Also, members of our own team analyze this data to produce public facing work. And finally, land conflicts evolve over time. So, to ensure that this is also captured, these conflicts are revisited every 3 to 4 months and updated accordingly. So we collect data on over 69 different parameters for each conflict case. So this has been added to the back of our report. You can take a look at it. So I'll just scroll through all the data points. Like I said, there are 69 different parameters. This includes data on the location of the conflict, details on what is triggering the conflict. Is it an airport or a coal mine, or is it a tiger reserve? We also record the demands of communities involved in these conflicts. So, communities dependent on the contested land also have various demands, which could be anything from demand for compensation and rehabilitation to them just outright refusing to part with their lands for the project. Then we have data on the tenurial nature of the land, private land and common land. We have a whole host of legal data as well, which my colleague Mukta will be analyzing in a presentation later today. We document violence, if any, in these conflicts, and also important aggregates like the number of people affected, area, total land area affected, investments involved, etc. We also look at the parties involved in the project, in the conflict, and we try to reach out to all of them for comments while documenting the conflict. We also look at the significance of land to the communities, whether it holds an economic value or a religious or a cultural value. Details on the project causing conflicts are also recorded, whether it's been stalled or delayed or whether it's ongoing. And if the conflict has ended finally, we have details of how the conflict ended, on what exactly happened. So you can visit our website in case you haven't already, and there are filters that you can apply to narrow down to the cases that you're interested in. Next, so this shows the spread of land conflicts in our database across the country. So this is just to give you a sense of our coverage across states. There are some states where we haven't documented too many conflicts yet. Conflicts have been reported in all 28 states and 4 of the 8 union territories. Of the 766 districts in the country, 323 have at least one ongoing conflict in them. Now I'm moving on to the findings of the report. So like I mentioned before, we studied 607 ongoing conflicts. These we found affect over 63 lakh people. These conflicts span over 15 lakh hectares of land, and investments worth at least 22 lakh crores are embroiled in these land conflicts. This is a very conservative estimate because we were unable to get investment data for several conflicts. This chart gives you a sense of the span of land conflicts. So how long have they been happening? We saw that 171 conflicts have been going on for over a decade. There are 31 conflicts that have been going on for over 2 decades, and 12 conflicts have been alive for over 3 decades. Totally, we have about 100 conflicts that have been going on for over 2 decades. And we even have 3 conflicts that have been going on for over 100 years. So the next is on the impact on the lives of the people. So people involved in land conflicts reported that they were subjected to physical attacks in 55 cases, threats and intimidation in 44 cases, lathi charge or tear gas attacks in 37 cases, and in around 34 cases, there were killings of people, and in another 18 cases, there were torching of houses. And it's important to note that most of this violence is by the state. A very small portion is seen in inter-community conflicts. Like I said before, we record all the parties involved in conflicts. So conflicts could be of different types. Like our definition mentioned, one affected party is always the community. The second party would be the one contesting the use, ownership of, or access to that piece of land. So the second party could be either a public sector undertaking, it could be a corporate, or they could also be a government department directly involved in the conflict, or any other non-government departments involved as well, including another community. We also document inter-community conflicts. It's important to note that the state will almost always be a party to the conflict, either directly or indirectly as mediators. We hadn't segregated data on where the government is a direct party or a non-direct party, so we've aggregated them with the others. So we see that corporates alone are involved in 22% of the conflicts. Public sector undertakings are involved in 13% of the conflicts, and both corporates and PSUs are involved in around 10% of the conflicts. Next is the division according to region. Like you can see, there's 73% of our conflicts are located purely on rural land. And so most of our conflicts are situated in rural areas. Only about 17% of our conflicts are in urban areas. Okay. So we have divided activities causing conflicts into six broad sectors. So here is a sector-wise distribution of these conflicts. The largest portion, this is also picked off from our report, so you can look at it in detail. The largest portion of conflicts are caused due to the infrastructure sector, which includes roads, railways, etc. 16% of the conflicts are caused due to the power sector, which includes hydro projects, renewable energy projects, and all that. Then we have conflicts due to conservation and forestry projects. So your tiger reserves and your afforestation drives, these also cause a lot of conflicts. Industries cause around 11% of the conflicts. And finally, we've categorized the other reasons that don't fall into these five as land use conflicts. So your border disputes and communal conflicts, etc., will fall under land use conflicts. So coming to investments. So this graph shows you the spread of investments across sectors. And as it's evident, most of the investment is, of course, a large share is in the infrastructure sector, but most of the investments are concentrated in four sectors alone. So we took up these four intensive sectors, which totally caused around 416 conflict cases. And we did a deeper analysis on how land conflicts impact these projects and the investments involved in them. Um, so from these conflicts, we culled out data on the status of projects which were causing these conflicts. Out of the total 416 projects, 9 have been scrapped altogether, and 71 projects are currently stalled. Work on the project has been stalled. And when we look deeper into these stalled projects, the 71 stalled projects, our own data showed that in every 3 out of the 4 cases, projects were stalled purely because of land conflict. For the rest, 1/4 of the cases, we were unable to gather data on what was the reason. So in the 9 cases, the land conflict did not end even when the project was cancelled. This is because communities were demanding the return of their land. For example, a case in Orissa where Tata was going to set up a power plant. So, because of opposition from various environmental groups, including the forest department, the project ultimately had to be shelved. But the state is yet to give back the land to which has been acquired from the people. And then we move on to conflicts which have been completed, but projects which have been completed, but conflicts around these projects still exist. So in these cases, communities usually complained against procedural violations, like they were still awaiting rehabilitation and compensation that was promised to them when the land was being taken over for the project. And I'll just run you through the quantum of investments that are stuck in them. So like you can see in the 71 stalled projects, over almost 4 lakh crore investments are stuck in stalled projects. In the projects that are underway, in 216 conflict cases, the project is going, but it's still embroiled in land conflicts. So around 16 lakh crores of investment is at the risk of being, stalled or delayed because it's embroiled in land conflicts. So, from among the projects which are still under construction or the projects which are not complete, this includes the stalled and delayed projects, we found that 82 projects had crossed their deadline. These were experiencing delays ranging from a few months to almost 22 years. And you can see that this has resulted in the lockup of investments worth 5.62 lakh crores. Here you can see a sector-wise state of projects in land conflicts. Conflicts in the industrial sector have the highest rate of stalled projects. This is followed by mining, where 22% of the projects were stalled. So to get into the main underlying issues of these conflicts, to understand the issue as to why people are protesting these conflicts, we did an overall analysis of the demands and contentions of the communities, affected by the conflict. So, in a conflict, people may have multiple demands and contentions. So, going back to our set of 607 ongoing land conflicts, we found that the most the most common contention of the people on the ground is that there are procedural violations during the takeover of their lands. This we see in 41% of the conflicts. People have demanded that their right over common land and resources must be protected in 34% of the cases. In, in 28% cases, they are demanding the legal recognition of their land rights. And in 28% conflicts, again, they've outright refused to give up their lands for the project. Basically said, go set up your project somewhere else. We're not giving our lands. Next, we look at what the lands are being used for by the communities. The most common use is agricultural use of contested land. This we found in almost 42% of the conflicts. The second most popular is residential use. So in many cases, these people have either in these cases where people are using it for as residential use, people are either at the risk of being completely displaced or uprooted from their lands, or they've already been uprooted from their lands. In 28% of the cases, they depend on the land for some kind of natural resource extraction, like fishing or collecting minor forest produce, etc. And you can also see there are other significances, like water bodies which may be present on the land, and land is used for grazing and other things. Next, we also identify legal processes or loopholes involved in these conflicts. So, to briefly explain what it is, these are situations or issues in a land conflict where a question of law is involved. I'm just briefly running you through these. My colleague Mukta will cover them in greater detail in her presentation later today. So, as you can see, a lack of legal protection over land rights is the most frequently occurring legal issue. This is found in over 31% of the conflicts. This is indicative that either the traditional rights of the people over land have not been recognized by the law, or that legal rights over land have been violated by the state, or they haven't been protected by the judiciary. The next most common or frequently occurring legal process or loophole is forced evictions and dispossession of land. So we've been hearing of this a lot lately. This has occurred in more than 27% of the conflicts. So going back to demands, we studied demands specifically in the projects that had been stalled or delayed, and found that the pattern was similar to the overall pattern that we saw earlier. Violation of procedure was the most common contention, occurring in almost half of the conflicts. This is followed by opposition on the grounds of environmental degradation, which is seen in 44% of the conflicts, followed by refusal to part with land for the project, seen in 41% of the conflicts again. The kinds of demands in completed projects were slightly different. Of course, the leading contention was that the procedure was violated, but a large number of conflicts also saw people demanding people demanding that they get paid the promised rehabilitation and compensation at the time of acquisition. So a classic case of this is the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada, where people are still awaiting rehabilitation despite the completion of the project. Now we move on to some other thematic analysis that we conducted for the report. The first is a study of the nature of land conflicts across tenure types. So 76% of conflicts are located on common lands. Like overall, we have around 76 of our conflicts located on common lands. We had established in our earlier report as well, which was released in 2020, that the most conflicted land is common land. In this report, we further divide them into forested and non-forested commons. Yeah. So within conflicts involving commons, the highest number of conflicts, around 37%, occur over non-forested commons. In 23 point, almost 23% of conflicts occur on forested commons, and 36% of the conflicts are spread across both forested and non-forested commons. Next, we'll see the significance of land and demands of communities in both forested and non-forested commons. In forested commons, in 50% of the cases, communities use the land for some kind of natural resource extraction. So, like I mentioned before, natural resource extraction includes, taking of minor forest produce, etc. In 39% of communities residing on common lands, 22% of the land, contested land, was being used by the communities for cultivation or some kind of agriculture. Looking at the demands, so over 70% conflicts saw communities demanding legal recognition of their land rights. This is in forested commons. So 64% cases saw that communities were demanding protection of their access to common lands and resources. And in 51% of the cases, they've complained of procedural violations. Moving on to non-forested commons. So we see that the most common use of land in these conflicts is for residential purposes. So this shows that people don't have legal recognition of their housing. The second most popular use we recorded was agricultural use, seen in 33% of the conflicts. This is followed by use for natural resource extraction in around 21% of the conflicts. Communities on these lands have demanded to retain or protect access to resources in 39% of these conflicts. And the second most frequently occurring contention is complaint against procedural violations again, followed by both demand for rehabilitation and opposition on environmental grounds. My colleague Anmol, in her presentation later today, will cover the intersection of laws and legal governance of commons and how that plays into conflicts. Next, we move on to conflicts that fall on districts with Schedule 5 areas in them. So you can see this map here. As we know, these are areas notified under Schedule 5 of the Constitution with a large number of tribal population in them. These are areas with special governance provisions in order to safeguard the interests and special rights of tribal communities here. Fifth schedule districts, is important to note, constitute only 15% of the total districts in the country. However, they are the site of almost 25% of all land conflicts, 23% of the conflict affected population, and 20% of almost 21% of the conflicted land area. This means that the intensity of conflicts in these areas is higher than the rest of the country. This is also visible in the map. The areas that have green boundaries are Schedule 5 districts, and that's the heat map that I showed you earlier. So you can see that the concentration is more in these areas. So we move into the kinds of demands prevalent in these areas. The most popular contention, again, is violation of proper procedure in 48% of conflicts. And in these areas, we see that there are a large number of communities which are unwilling to give up their land for the project. They've also asked to retain access to common lands in many cases. Now we move on to the last part, which is the topic of resolution of conflicts. Over the past 6 years, we mentioned earlier that 82 conflicts have ended on the ground or become inactive on the ground over time. From this chart, we noticed that half of these conflicts ended on the ground because the community's original demands were met. In 11 cases, communities agreed to alternative offers, and in 7 cases, the conflict simply died down because the court's decision was not in favor of the community. In the 17 other conflicts where it's written conflict ended due to any other reason, it's simply because the community stopped protesting over time, or some kind of mutual agreement between the parties was agreed upon. Um, so, like I mentioned again, over half, I mean, half of these conflicts have resolved. uh, I mean, in case we notice that half of these conflicts have been resolved because the community's original demands were met. So we looked at what exactly these demands are. Um, Look at the chart on the left. The most popular demands were refusal to give up land for project, and again procedural violations. In these conflicts, most ended when the project itself was cancelled, shelved, or modified, like you can see in the chart on the right. In all six cases where the conflict ended, owing to the project being modified, the project was shifted to another location. Data on the exact manner in which conflict ended was not available for around six conflicts. So, to conclude, our data corroborates that the simple black and white picture of people simply opposing development projects is not true. In many cases, communities are demanding that the state follow the law while taking over lands. Instead, governments have responded to these conflicts by trying to simplify or fast track procedures. This has been a focus over the past several years, but our data shows that it has not helped the communities or industries. This indicates that the fundamental issues in land conflicts concern communities' demands to exercise their rights and agency over land, and not their opposition as such to specific projects. People are aware of the rights they possess over land and demand that following laws that protect these rights must be an integral part of going ahead with any infra or industrial project. A large chunk of land conflicts can be avoided this way. Thank you.